You're thirsty. It's the middle of summer. Someone hands you a tall glass of ice-cold water. You drink it without thinking. Now imagine a doctor, a real, respected, licensed physician, grabbing the glass out of your hand and telling you that what you just did could kill you. Not as a joke. Not as a metaphor. As a genuine, documented medical warning. Published in journals. Taught in medical schools. Believed by millions of people for the better part of 2 centuries. Iced water, they said, was dangerous. It caused cholera. It triggered heart failure. It gave you internal convulsions. It could stop your stomach dead in its tracks. And the terrifying part? People died, and doctors blamed the ice water. Today we're going to find out how one of the most refreshing things on earth became one of the most feared. And what it tells us about the way humans make sense of things we don't yet understand. Let's go! To understand why people feared ice water, you have to understand what a strange and new thing ice actually was for most of history. For most of human civilization, if you wanted cold water in summer, you were basically out of luck. You could store water in clay pots. Evaporation cooled it slightly. You could dig a cellar and hope for the best. But truly cold, ice-cold water? That was a luxury available only to kings and emperors, who could afford to harvest ice from mountaintops and store it in underground chambers lined with straw. Then the 19th century happened. A Boston businessman named Frederick Tudor, whom history has nicknamed, brilliantly, the Ice King, figured out that you could harvest ice from frozen New England ponds in winter, pack it in sawdust, and ship it to southern states, to the Caribbean, eventually to India and beyond. By the 1830s and 40s, ice was becoming, for the first time in history, something ordinary people could actually buy. And ordinary people had opinions about it. Because here's the thing. When something goes from being a rare luxury to a mass-market product almost overnight, the culture doesn't always keep up. People didn't grow up with ice drinks. They didn't have generations of habit telling them it was fine. What they had, instead, were doctors. The 19th century medical establishment was, to put it charitably, working with incomplete information. Germ theory, the foundational idea that diseases are caused by microscopic organisms, wasn't widely accepted until the 1860s and 70s, thanks to Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch. Before that, the dominant explanation for disease was something called miasma theory, the idea that illness was caused by bad air, rotting organic matter, and disruptions to the body's natural balance. The body, in this framework, was a finely tuned system of temperatures and humors, and anything that shocked that system, any sudden, violent change, could throw it into chaos. Cold water, drunk quickly on a hot day, was the perfect villain for this worldview. Think about it from their perspective. You're a physician in 1850. A patient comes to you sweating, overheated from working in the sun. They drank a large quantity of ice water. Now they have stomach cramps and feel faint. You don't know about blood vessels dilating and then suddenly constricting. What you see is, person was hot, person drank ice water, person became ill. Cause and effect. Simple. Logical. Completely wrong, but logical given what they knew. And so the warnings multiplied. The fears around ice water weren't vague. They were specific. And that specificity is what made them so convincing. Fear number 1, cholera. The 19th century was absolutely ravaged by cholera pandemics. In 1832, in 1849, and in 1866, waves of cholera tore through American and European cities, killing tens of thousands. Nobody knew what caused it. Nobody knew it was bacteria living in contaminated water supplies. When doctors noticed that ice, which was harvested from ponds and rivers that were sometimes, shall we say, not pristine, seemed to correlate with cholera outbreaks, the conclusion was swift: ice water causes cholera. They weren't entirely wrong about the association. They were just wrong about the direction. It wasn't the coldness. It was the contamination. The ice itself was sometimes carrying the bacteria. But the danger of cold water narrative was much easier to communicate than germ theory, which most physicians still didn't believe. Fear number 2, sudden cardiac death. Medical journals of the era are full of case reports of people dropping dead after drinking ice water. One popular account described a man at a summer picnic who drank a full glass of ice water, clutched his chest, and died. The explanation offered: the cold liquid caused the stomach to spasm violently, and the spasm disrupted the heart. We now understand this differently. Heat exhaustion and overexertion can cause cardiac events. The Victorians, understandably, struggled to make that distinction without modern diagnostic tools. Fear number 3, digestive destruction. Perhaps the most widely held fear was that ice water extinguished the digestive fire. This wasn't just Victorian intuition. It had roots going back to ancient Greek medicine. Hippocrates himself had warned against cold drinks. The stomach, it was believed, relied on warmth to break down food. Pour cold water on top of a meal, and you'd essentially freeze the whole process. Food would sit there, undigested, rotting inside you. The medical term they used was cold water dyspepsia. It was treated as a real diagnosis. Doctors would ask patients about their ice water consumption the way doctors today ask about smoking. And if you think that's purely a Western obsession, it wasn't. Similar beliefs were widespread in Chinese traditional medicine, Indian Ayurvedic practice, and across cultures in Latin America and Asia. Cold water after meals? Still controversial in parts of the world today. What makes this story genuinely extraordinary is that the fear of ice water didn't quietly fade away. It became a cultural battle. In the United States specifically, where Frederick Tudor's ice trade was booming, there was enormous economic pressure pushing back against anti-ice sentiment. Ice companies hired publicists. Doctors who endorsed ice water were promoted. The debate played out in newspapers like a proper public controversy. And then something unexpected happened. A heat wave. In the summer of 1896, a catastrophic heat wave struck the American Northeast. In New York City alone, over 1,300 people died in a single week. Streets were littered with dead horses. A young health commissioner named Cyrus Edson made a decision: distribute free ice to the poor. Get cold water into people. It worked. Death rates in the neighborhoods that received ice dropped noticeably compared to those that didn't. The ice water killed the narrative took a serious hit from which it never fully recovered. Here's the part that should make you genuinely pause. The belief that cold or ice water is dangerous, particularly around meals, has not died. Not fully. Right now, if you search online, you will find wellness blogs, traditional medicine practitioners, and well-meaning advice columns warning you that drinking cold water damages your digestion, causes mucus buildup, interferes with fat metabolism, or is simply not natural for the body. Some of it is dressed up in modern language, slows your metabolism, causes your blood vessels to constrict, but it's the same ancient idea in new clothes. And here's why that's interesting rather than just annoying. The myth survived not because people were stupid. It survived because it felt intuitively true. Warmth feels safe. Cold feels like a shock. And when you drink ice water fast and feel a brief headache or a slight stomach flutter, your brain is looking for an explanation. And that was bad for me is a very available one. This is how medical myths work. They don't arise from nowhere. They arise from real observations, interpreted through incomplete frameworks, and then passed down through culture, mothers warning children and physicians trained by other physicians. The fear of ice water is a masterclass in the difference between a convincing story and a true one. So, the next time someone tells you ice water is bad for you, You can tell them about cholera pandemics, ice merchants, Civil War surgeons, and a heat wave in 1896 that changed everything. You can tell them that for 200 years, people were scared of one of the most harmless things on earth, because fear travels faster than facts, and a convincing story is much easier to share than a careful study. And then you can drink your ice water. You've earned it. If you enjoyed this video, there's a whole series of ordinary things with extraordinary, forgotten backstories. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you then.